Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Serpent and the Rainbow, a Harvard scientist's astonishing journey into the secret societies of Haitian voodoo, zombies, and magic, by Wade Davis. Narrated by Runnette. He knew the story of King Da, the incarnation of the serpent, which is the eternal beginning, never-ending, who took his pleasure mystically with a queen who was the rainbow, patroness of the waters and of all bringing forth. A Carpentier, the kingdom of this world. Everything is poison. Nothing is poison. Paracelsus. A note on orthography. The orthography of the name of the Haitian traditional religion has been the source of some academic debate. The word voodoo comes from the Fon language of Dahomey, now Benin, and Togo. It means simply God or spirit. Unfortunately, as a result of the sensational and inaccurate interpretations in the media, Hollywood in particular, the word voodoo has come to represent a fantasy of black magic and sorcery. Anthropologists have attempted both to highlight and to avoid this stereotype by using a number of terms, including voodoo, vodoun, voudoun, and vodoun. I have followed their lead because I feel, as I hope this book will show, that a rich religion of the Haitian traditional society deserves to be recognized, and what we have come to know as voodoo bears little resemblance to it. I use the term vodoun because it seems to me to be phonetically the most accurate. However, it is important to note at the outset that the Haitian peasants themselves do not call their religion voudoun. Theirs is a closed system of belief, and in a world of few alternatives, one either serves the loa, the spirits, or one does not. Voudoun, from their point of view, refers to a specific event, a dance ritual during which the spirits arrive to mount and possess the believer. For the sake of clarity, I refer throughout the book to the Vodoun Society. This is a concept of convenience, but it also reflects the view of an outsider looking in, not that of a believer surrounded by his spirit realm. Likewise, the spelling of zombie, Z-O-M-B-I, is a matter of some disagreement. Webster's prefers zombie, Z-O-M-B-I-E, the more familiar form to zombie, Z-O-M-B-I. My Oxford Dictionary doesn't even have the term, which reflects the American fascination with Haiti since the occupation. The sources in the literature are mixed. Seabrook, 1929, spelled it Z-O-M-B-I-E, as did Darren, 1953. Metro, 1972, Huxley, 1966, and Leyburn, 1941, on the other hand, use Z-O-M-B-I. Metro is perhaps the recognized authority on the religion, but to my mind Darren had the more intimate contact with the people, and is an important source as well, although this has little to do with the spelling of the term. Of more interest is the derivation. The word probably comes from the Congo word of nzambi, which more or less means spirit of a dead person. This is yet another example of the African roots of the Vodoun religion and society. Part 1. The Poison. 1. The Jaguar. My first meeting with the man who would send me on my quest for the Haitian zombie poison occurred on a damp, miserable winter's day in late February 1974. I was sitting with my roommate David in a cafe on a corner of Harvard Square. David was a mountain boy from the West, one generation removed from the family cattle ranch, and just about as rough-cut and restless as Harvard could tolerate. My home was on the Rain Coast of British Columbia. Both of us had come east to study anthropology, but after 2 years we had grown tired of just reading about Indians. A map of the world covered most of one wall of the cafe, and as I huddled over a cup of coffee, I noticed David staring at it intently. He glanced at me, then back at the map, then again at me, only this time with a grin that splayed his beard from ear to ear. Lifting his arm toward the map, he dropped his finger on a piece of land that cut into Hudson's Bay, well beyond the Arctic Circle. I looked over at him and felt my own arm rise until it landed me in the middle of the upper Amazon. David left Cambridge later that week, and within a month had moved into an Eskimo settlement on the shore of Rankin Inlet. It would be many months before I saw him again. For myself, having decided to go to the Amazon, there was only one man to see. Professor Richard Evans Schultes was an almost mythic figure on the campus at that time, and like many other students both within and outside the Department of Anthropology, I had a respect for him that bordered on veneration. The last of the great plant explorers in the Victorian tradition, he was for us a hero in a time of few heroes, a man who, having taken a single semester's leave to collect medicinal plants in the northwest Amazon, had disappeared into the rainforest for 12 years. Later that same afternoon, I slipped quietly onto the 4th floor of Harvard's Botanical Museum. On first sight, the Spartan furnishings were disappointing, the herbarium cases too ordered and neat, the secretaries matronly. Then I discovered the laboratory. Most biological labs are sterile places, forests of tubes and flashing lights, with preserved specimens issuing smells that could make a fresh flower wilt. This place was extraordinary. Against one wall, beside a panoply of Amazonian dance masks, was a rack of blowguns and spears. In glass-covered oak cabinets were laid out elegant displays of the world's most common narcotic plants. Bark cloth covered another wall. Scattered about the large room were plant products of every conceivable shape and forms. Vials of essential oils, specimens of para-rubber, narcotic lianas and fish poisons, mahogany carvings, fiber mats and ropes, and dozens of hand-blown glass jars with pickled fruits from the Pacific, fruits that looked like stars. Then I noticed the photographs. In one, Schultes stood in a long line of Indian men, his chest decorated with intricate motifs and his gaunt frame wrapped in a grass skirt and draped in bark cloth. In another he was alone, perched like a raptor on the edge of a sandstone massif, peering into a sea of forest. A third captured him against the backdrop of a raging cataract in soiled khakis, with a pistol strapped to his waist as he knelt to scrutinize a petroglyph. They were like images out of dreams, difficult to reconcile with the scholarly figure who quietly walked into the laboratory in front of me. "Yes?" he inquired in a resonant Bostonian accent. Face to face with a legend, I stumbled. Nervously, and in a single breath, I told him my name, that I came from British Columbia, that I had saved some money working in a logging camp, and that I wanted to go to the Amazon to collect plants. At that time I knew little about the Amazon and less about plants. I expected him to quiz me. Instead, after gazing for a long time across the room, he peered back at me through his antiquated bifocals, across the stacks and stacks of plant specimens that littered the table between us, and said very simply, "So you want to go to South America and collect plants. When would you like to leave?" I returned 2 weeks later for a final meeting, at which time Professor Schultes drew out a series of maps and outlined a number of possible expeditions. Aside from that, he offered only 2 pieces of advice. There was no point buying a heavy pair of boots, he said, because what few snakes I was apt to find generally bite at the neck. A pith helmet, however, was indispensable. Then he suggested enthusiastically that I not return from the Amazon without experimenting with ayahuasca, the vision vine, one of the most potent of hallucinogenic plants. I left his office with the distinct feeling that I was to be very much on my own. A fortnight later I left Cambridge for Columbia without a pith helmet, but with 2 letters of introduction to a botanical garden in Medellin and enough money to last a year, if spent carefully. I had absolutely no plans and no perception at the time that my whimsical decision in the cafe at Harvard Square would mark a major divide in my life. 3 months to the day after leaving Boston, I sat in a dismal cantina in northern Columbia, facing an eccentric geographer, an old friend of Professor Schultes's. A week before, he had asked me to join him and a British journalist on a walk across a few miles of swamp in the northwestern corner of the country. The journalist was Sebastian Snow, an English aristocrat who, having just walked from Tierra del Fuego at the tip of South America, now intended to walk to Alaska. The few miles of swamp referred to was the Darien Gap, 250 roadless miles of rainforest that separated Colombia from Panama. 2 years previously, a British Army platoon led by one of Sebastian's schoolboy friends had traversed the Darien Gap, and despite radio communication had suffered several casualties, including 2 unpublicized deaths. Now the intrepid journalist wanted to prove that a small party, unencumbered with military gear, could do what Snow's schoolmate's military unit could not: traverse the gap safely. Unfortunately, it was the height of the rainy season, the worst time of year to attempt such an expedition. By then I had some experience in the rainforest, and when Snow discovered I was a British subject, he assumed that I would accompany him all the way. The geographer, on Snow's instruction, was offering me the position of guide and interpreter. Considering that I had never been anywhere near the Darien Gap, I found the offer curious. Nevertheless, I accepted and gave the assignment little thought, until the night before we were to depart, when in a clapboard town at the end of the last road before the rainforest, an old woman approached me on the street and offered an unsolicited appraisal of my situation. My hair was blonde, she said, my skin golden, and my eyes the color of the sea. Before I had a chance to savor the compliment, she added that it was too bad that all these features would be yellow by the time I reached Panama. That same night, to make matters worse, the geographer, who knew the region far better than I, somewhat mysteriously dropped out of the expedition. The first days were among the worst, for we had to traverse the vast swamps east of the Rio Atrato, and with the water in flood, this meant walking for kilometers at a time in water to our chests. Once across the Atrato, however, conditions improved, and without much difficulty we moved from one Choco or Kuna Indian village to the next, soliciting new guides and obtaining provisions as we went along. Our serious problems began when we reached the small town of Yavisa, a miserable hovel that masquerades as the capital of Darien province, but is in fact nothing more than a catch basin for all the misfits exiled from each of the flanking nations. In those days the Guardia Civil of Panama had explicit instructions to harass foreigners, and we were the only gringos the Yavisa post was likely to see for some time. We came expected. Already at a border post 2 days west of the frontier, an unctuous guard had stolen our only compass. Now, at the headquarters, we were accused of smuggling marijuana, an accusation which, however absurd, gave them the excuse to confiscate our gear. Sebastian became violent, and did his best to prove his maxim that if one yells loudly enough in English, any foreigner will understand. This they did not find amusing. Things went from bad to worse when the sergeant, detailed to rummage through our gear, discovered Sebastian's money. The mood of the commandant changed immediately, and with a smile like an open lariat he suggested that we enjoy the town and return to speak with him in the evening. We had been walking for 2 weeks, and had hoped to rest in Yavisa for a few days, but our plan changed with a warning we received that afternoon. After leaving the guardhouse, I paddled upriver to an Australian mission post we had heard of, hoping to borrow a compass and perhaps some charts, for the next section of forest was uninhabited. One of the missionaries met me at the dock, and acted as if he knew me well. Then, soberly, he explained that according to some of the Kuna at the mission, agents of the commandant intended to intercept our party at the forest and kill us for our money. The missionary, who had lived in the region for some years, took the rumor seriously and urged us to leave as soon as possible. I returned immediately to the jail, discreetly retrieved a few critical items, and then, abandoning the rest of our gear, told the commandant that we had decided to spend a few days at the mission before continuing upriver. Instead, equipped with 2 rifles borrowed from the mission, and accompanied by 3 Kuna guides, We left Yavisa the next day before dawn, downriver. Our problems began immediately. On the chance that we were being followed, the Kuna led us first up a stone creek bed, and then, entering the forest, they deliberately described the most circuitous route possible. Sebastian stumbled, badly twisting an ankle. That first night out we discovered what it meant to sleep on the forest floor at the height of the rainy season. In a vain attempt to keep warm, the three Kuna and I huddled together, taking turns in the middle. Nobody slept. By the end of the second day I had begun to suspect that our riverine Kuna were less than familiar with the forest hinterland, and after 3 days I realized they were completely disoriented. Our destination was a construction camp at Santa Fe, which in those years marked the eastern limit of the right-of-way of the Pan-American Highway. A passage that should have taken 2 days at most stretched on to 7. When one is lost, it is not the absolute number of days that is important, it is the vast uncertainty that consumes every moment. With the rifles we had food, but it never seemed enough, and with the rains each afternoon and night we found little rest. Yet we still had to walk long hours each day through the rainforest, and when one is stripped of all that protects one from nature, the rainforest is an awesome place. Sebastian's injury had not improved, and though he walked courageously, he nevertheless slowed our progress. The heat and incessant life seemed to close in. Exquisitely beautiful creatures became a plague, and even the shadows of the vegetation, the infinite forms, shapes, and textures, became threatening. In the damp evenings, sitting awake for long hours while the torrential rains turned the earth to mud, I began to feel like a crystal of sugar on the tongue of a beast, impatiently awaiting dissolution. The worst moment came on the morning of the 7th day. An hour from our previous night's camp, we stumbled upon the first person we had seen since leaving Yavisa, a solitary and slightly mad woodsman who had carved a clearing in the forest and begun to plant a garden. When we asked the direction to Santa Fe, he looked surprised, and, unable to suppress his laughter, he pointed to a barely discernible trail. At a fast pace, he told us, there was a chance that we could arrive in another 2 weeks. His news was so devastating that it was simply impossible to acknowledge. We had no food left, were physically and mentally exhausted, and had only enough ammunition left to hunt for 2 or 3 days. Yet we had no choice but to continue, and without a word passing between us, we began to walk, myself in front with one of the rifles, then Sebastian, followed by the 3 Kuna. We kept a fast pace until the forest again held us tangibly, drawing us on into a hallucinatory passage devoid of will or desire. Into that trance, not 20 meters before me, leapt a black jaguar. It paused for an instant, then turned away and took several strides toward what would turn out to be the direction to Santa Fe, before springing like a shadow into the vegetation. No one else saw it, but for me it was life itself, and I began to believe a portent, for it turned out that Santa Fe was not 2 weeks away, but rather a mere 2 days. That very evening we found a track that led to the right-of-way of the highway. It had all been a test of will, and as we burst into the full sunlight after so many days in the shade, Sebastian turned to me, placed his arms about my etiolated body, and said simply that God works in mysterious ways. That evening we made camp by a clear stream and broiled a wild turkey that one of the Kuna had shot, and later we slept in the open under a sky full of stars. For our first night since leaving Yavisa, it did not rain. The next morning I arose early, certain that I could reach Santa Fe in a single day. With my belly finally full and the weight of uncertainty lifted from my mind, I basked in the freedom of the open road and felt an exhilaration I had never known before. My pace increased, and I left the others far behind. The road at first was no more than a track that curved hypnotically over and around every contour of the land. Several miles on, however, it rose slowly to the crest of a ridge, and suddenly, From the rise, I could see the right-of-way of the Pan-American Highway, a cleared and flattened corridor 100 meters wide that reached to the horizon. Like a deer on the edge of a clearing, I instinctively fell back, momentarily confounded by so much space. Then I started to walk slowly, tentatively. My senses, which had never been so keen, took in every pulse and movement. No one was behind me and no one in front, and the forest was reduced to the distant walls of a canyon. Never again would I sense such freedom. I was 20, and felt as if I had reached the heart of where I had dreamed to be. Before I had left Boston that spring, I had advised myself in the frontispiece of my journal to risk discomfort and solitude for understanding. Now it seemed I had found the means, and my chance meeting with the jaguar remained with me, an affirmation of nature's benevolence. After the Darien Gap, I began to look upon Professor Schultes' assignments as koans, enigmatic challenges guaranteed to propel me into places beyond my imaginings. I accepted them easily, reflexively, as a plant takes water. Thus, in time, the Darien expedition was reduced to but an episode in an ethnobotanical apprenticeship that eventually took me throughout much of western South America. I earned my degree in anthropology in 1977, and following a 2-year hiatus from the tropics in northern Canada, returned to Harvard as one of Professor Schultes' graduate students. Schultes was far more than a catalyst of adventures. His guidance and example gave our expeditions form and substance, while ethnobotany remained the metaphor that lent them utility. He had spent 13 years in the Amazon because he believed that the Indian knowledge of medicinal plants could offer vital new drugs for the entire world. 45 years ago, for example, he had been one of a handful of plant explorers to note the peculiar properties of curare, the Amazonian arrow and dart poisons. Struck by a poisoned dart, a monkey high in the forest canopy rapidly loses all muscular control and collapses to the forest floor. Often it is the fall, not the toxin, that actually kills. Chemical analysis of these arrow poisons yielded D-tubocurarin, a powerful muscle relaxant once used in conjunction with various anesthetics in virtually all surgery. The several species that yielded curare were but a few of the 1,800 plants of medical potential identified by Schultes in the northwest Amazon alone. He knew that thousands more remained elsewhere in the Amazon and around the world. It was to find these that he sent us out, and it was in this spirit that he brought me to the most important assignment of my career. Late on a Monday afternoon, early in 1982, I received a call from Schultes' secretary. I was teaching an undergraduate course with him that semester and expected a discussion on the progress of the class. As I entered his office, the Venetian blinds were down, and he greeted me without looking up from his desk. "I've got something for you. Could be interesting." He handed me the New York address of Dr. Nathan S. Klein, psychiatrist and pioneer in the field of psychopharmacology, the study of the actions of drugs on the mind. It had been Klein who, with a handful of others in the 1950s, rose to challenge orthodox Freudian psychiatry by suggesting that at least some mental disorders reflected chemical imbalances that could be rectified by drugs. His research led to the development of Serpent, a valuable tranquilizer derived from the Indian snake root, a plant that had been used in Vedic medicine for thousands of years. As a direct result of Klein's work, the number of patients at American psychiatric institutions had declined from over 500,000 in the 1950s to some 120,000 today. The accomplishment had proved a two-edged sword, however, and it made Klein a controversial figure. At least one science reporter had referred to the bag ladies of New York as Klein's babies. Schultes moved away from his desk to take a call. When he was finished, he asked me if I would be able to leave within a fortnight for the Caribbean country of Haiti. 2. The Frontier of Death. 2 nights later, I was met at the front door of an East Side Manhattan apartment by a tall, strikingly handsome woman whose long hair was pulled up over her head in the manner of a Renoir model. We shook hands. "Mr. Davis, I'm Marna Anderson, Nate Klein's daughter. Do come in." She turned abruptly and led me through a corridor of clinical whiteness into a large room crowded with color. Approaching me from the head of an immense refectory table was a short man in a white linen suit and an antique vest of silk brocade. "You must be Wade Davis, Nate Klein. I'm glad you could make it." There were perhaps 9 people in the room, and though Klein made the obligatory introductions, it was in a manner so perfunctory as to let me know that none of them mattered. He lingered only when we reached an elderly man sitting narrow and stiff in a corner of the room. "I'd like you to meet one of my oldest colleagues, Professor Heinz Lehmann. Heinz is the former head of psychiatry and psychopharmacology at McGill." "Ah, Mr. Davis," Lehmann said softly, "I am delighted that you have joined our little venture." "I don't know that I have." "Yes, well, let us wait and see." Klein directed me to a sofa where 3 pleasant but nondescript women sat sipping cocktails, their attentions scattered. A few moments passed in gossip, and then they began to question me about my life with an enthusiasm that made me uncomfortable. As soon as I had a chance, I got up and began to circulate, making my way toward the bar, where I poured myself a drink. The room was filled with art. Haitian paintings, antique games and puzzles, a Persian chest with gilt decorations, a small forest of naive early American weather vanes, iron horses poised in flight. The lights of the city drew me out onto the balcony. Low clouds swept through the high corridors of darkness, slowly dissolving the summits of the skyscrapers, and from far below came the sound of tires running over glistening pavement. Looking back through the window, I saw Klein moving vigorously about the room, ushering the last of his dinner guests to the door. His movement seemed ostentatiously virile, reminding me of the kind of elderly man who might ask you in public to place your hand on his chest to measure the strength of his heart. He seemed ill-cast as a doctor, exhibiting a vanity more likely in a poet. Lehmann, on the other hand, tall, thin, and frail, appeared born to be a psychiatrist, and I couldn't help wondering what vocation he would have pursued had he lived in an earlier age, before men were prepared to yield their feelings to analysis. Marna joined her father at the door of the apartment, linking her arm lightly in his as they said good night to their guests. One sensed immediately the bond between them, how they chose to act as one person, so that his glance became her gesture, which beckoned me in from the balcony. Emptied of the other guests, the room strangely came to life. Lehmann, visibly more at ease, moved to its center. He fixed me with a smile. "Let me relieve you of any further suspense, Mr. Davis. We understand from Professor Schultes that you are attracted to unusual places. We propose to send you to the frontier of death. If what we are about to tell you is true, as we believe it is, it means that there are men and women dwelling in the continuous present, where the past is dead, and the future consists of fear and impossible desires." I looked at him skeptically, and then at Klein, who picked up from Lehmann automatically. "The first problem is to know when the dead are truly dead." Klein paused, regarding me deliberately. "Diagnosing death is an age-old problem. Petrarch was nearly buried alive. It haunted the Romans. The writings of Pliny the Elder are full of reports of men rescued at the last minute from the pyre. Eventually, to prevent such mishaps, the emperor had to fix by law the interval between apparent death and burial at 8 days. "Perhaps we should do the same," interjected Lehmann. "Recall the Sheffield case." Klein nodded and turned back to me. "Not 15 years ago, English doctors experimenting with a portable cardiograph at the Sheffield mortuary detected signs of life in a young woman certified dead from a drug overdose." Lehmann added with a smile, "There was an even more sensational case here in New York around the same time. A post-mortem operation at the city morgue was disrupted just as the first cut was being made. The patient leapt up and seized the doctor by the throat, who promptly died of shock. I looked across the table at the two of them, trying to conceal a faint premonition of horror. They were both old, their voices hard and clinical. It was as if the...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?